Welcome to Richard and Greg, a channel dedicated to discussion, debate and argument on a whole array of topics. In today's video, we discuss the Russian Empire, and despite it once being regarded as the world's third largest empire in history, we ask, where is it today? So let's go to that discussion. Now, last week, we started a new series entitled Empires and Dynasties, or Dynasties, depending upon which part of the world you come from. Last week, we talked about the Chinese Empire, but this week, we thought we would discuss the Russian Empire, as we thought that would be appropriate in view of the publicity Russia is currently receiving. Now, by way of a background, the Russian Empire was an empire that extended across Eurasia and North America from 1721, following the end of the Great Northern War, until the Republic was proclaimed by the provisional government that took power after the February Revolution of 1917. It was known, or is known, as the third largest empire in history, and at its greatest extent stretching over 3 continents: Europe, Asia, and North America. The Russian Empire was surpassed in size only by the British and the Mongol empires. So let's go over to controversially Greg and chat to him, as I'm sure at his age he must have been there. Greg, good evening.
Good evening. My memory wasn't too good at that stage. First-hand accounts are a little difficult to provide. However, when you think that the empire of Russia actually stretched all but the whole way around the world, from the Kamchatka Peninsula and in fact Alaska, right the way round and into Europe, that's quite a big piece of territory. However, to describe it as the second largest empire is possibly a little misleading, as a great deal of it was and is empty wilderness. There are areas of Russia that basically nobody ever goes to. And when you think that it is believed that a black hole, a very small black hole, hit Tunguska, it was several years before they were able to mount an expedition to go and see what had happened in this complete wilderness of forest. So it is a little misleading, but that is not to gainsay Russia has had a huge influence on various parts of the world. It's even said nowadays that it's having a huge influence on election results in America. But let's not go there. That is, even for me, a little controversial.
Okay then, Greg. Yeah, third, according to Wikipedia at least, it was the third largest empire after Great Britain and the Mongol Empire. So tell us, on a serious note, a little that you know of it and how it eventually morphed into the USSR and really became, I suppose, the pariah or seen as public enemy number 1 from the point of view of the Western world.
I think it started out on a natural course of warlords dominating different areas, whether we're talking of Kublai Khan or Timur the Lame or the various different great warlords, mostly emanating from the area that is now known as the Stans, Tajikistan, etc., etc. They conquered large pieces of territory. Timur the Lame, or Tamerlane, who travelled all his life around his emperate as a warlord. He set up his camp on a different point on his border on a daily basis and was always on the move. Or Genghis Khan, who was probably one of the best known and most brutal of warlords. It is said in his siege of Kabul that when he besieged the city, He laid waste to the country all around by raiding it for food to maintain his besieging army, and he beheaded people in the surrounding area and threw the heads onto a pile of heads that was thought to run to tens of thousands at the gates of Kabul on a daily basis until Kabul collapsed. So Russia as an empire in its various different areas has been an empire founded very much in brutality, not just expansionism. And I would argue that Russia brought very little with it of benefit to the peoples it conquered, unlike the Roman Empire, which brought a great deal, or the British Empire, which brought Westminster-style democracy, law, order, not just domination, and international trade. And if you take India, for instance, we opened up after the Mughal Empire. Britain opened up India. We produced a language that the people of the subcontinent could communicate with each other, rather than a multitude of local languages and a lack of communication. We built up the highways and then built up the railways for India, and we introduced India as a single entity, not just the various different states of the various different sultanates. So what did Russia actually do for its people? I would contend remarkably little. It substituted the warlords of Russia that conquered Russia and brought it under control, and the various constituency countries, all of which had very much to be conquered, and all of which seem to have been ruled by cruelty and a rod of iron. One wonders what benefits they got out of it. Central Russia itself, or should I say Russia as a country at the center of this, made a great deal, and its leaders became immensely wealthy. But then again, when they were overthrown by the Russian peoples in the February revolt of 1917, all that happened was within a few years, the people who had seized the country became the new warlords and became immensely wealthy. One of the wealthiest men on the planet at the moment is the leader of Russia, who is believed to be considerably wealthier than even Jeff Bezos with his Amazon fortune. Russia has been almost the bogeyman of the free world since the early 1700s. There was an attempt by the Russian Tsars to amalgamate with Napoleon so that they could work together to overthrow the British Empire, and Russia has always striven for a hot port in the Indian Ocean. And this has been the key to much of the troubles of Afghanistan, because that is the closest place for Russia to reach the Indian Ocean. And they have tried crossing Waziristan and conquering it on numerous occasions, whether Peter the Great and Napoleon working together, or back in the late 60s and early 70s, Russians trying to dominate Afghanistan. This has continued as a war of domination of almost every country that Russia has ever had control of. Not a great benefit to our planet, in my opinion, or the peoples of our planet. I cannot think of any great innovations that have proved of great value to the people that they have dominated. They have never been at the cutting edge of medicine or development. They have allied almost everything that they have purported to do well despite mineral wealth, to military might. Not a good example for our planet or anyone else seeking to create an empire.
Okay, Greg. Well, interestingly, when I did a little bit of research, I found out, which did surprise me, that in the 1897 census, Russia had the world's third largest population, only falling behind China and India. But looking back, one got the impression that perhaps their contribution, I suppose, to the rest of the world was limited because they were primarily an agricultural nation, worked by small or larger states by Russian peasants, which we all know were called serfs. And they were tied to the land in some form of feudal arrangement. Now, that happened until just past the mid-1800s. And then slowly, the economy industrialized with the help of foreign investment in railways and factories. So perhaps one could argue that maybe while it was being ruled over by the noble class, the boyars, or boyars, again, depending how you pronounce it, and then an emperor thereafter, perhaps that's why their contribution to the rest of the world was relatively limited, because they were predominantly an agricultural society.
They were an agricultural society in an agricultural era. Everybody was fundamentally agricultural at the time because we're talking in terms of before the Industrial Revolution, the 1720s. And Russia was very behind when it came to an industrial revolution. And it was still dependent on the warlords of Russia dominating, and tremendous output in terms of roads and highways and waterways, but all manually produced at immense cost to the peoples of Russia. And it's said of some of its highways that there is a body of a worker buried under every 100 meters. They've done immense damage to their area of the world as well. You only have to look at the Aral Sea as it was and as it is now, where you will find ships, fairly large, dare I say, seagoing, because the Aral Sea was at that originally a sea, not just a lake. And by diverting rivers for agriculture or convenience, there are now ships 10 and 20 miles away from the water, stranded. The Aral has shrunk incredibly. Then if you take Lake Baikal is an astonishing place in that it has a complete natural history base that is unique to Baikal. It's an immense lake fed by the Ob River, and it's a sea in its own right. But it's in danger of collapse because they process a great deal of timber in the area, which uses a lot of water in the production and has hugely polluted the entirety of Lake Baikal, and is in danger of destroying this fantastic ecosystem. We've made mistakes in the West, but I don't think anything as dedicated as has Russia in many areas. But that said, they have produced a great deal of wealth in terms of diamonds, oil, natural gas, and other minerals. And their warlords of today, Putin and the oligarchs, have made immense fortunes. However, it is difficult to see how they have benefited their people, many of whom live in abject poverty. And when traveling around in Russia, and I have friends who've traveled extensively in Russia, you will find there are so many completely abandoned rural towns where it just became uneconomic to survive, where there are great areas where basically, unless you are a party member, you are not allowed to travel. There are great areas that have been immensely neglected, and many of the people live in abject poverty in their cities in the most humble of apartments with very little facility and very much a peasant life. It can laughingly be argued that after many years of Cold War and huge investments by countries like America and Britain to some extent in armament and military might to confront and defend against Russia, Russia was actually overthrown by television, because the Russian people became able to see programs like Dallas and Dynasty, and where we know these are farcical fairy stories, they thought they were real. And why would they want to stay in the manner of Russia when many of the people were herding yaks, goats, sheep, and following them around from pasture to pasture and striking camp every day to move to new grasslands? Why would they want to go on living like that when in the Western world people own 6 cars and 3 swimming pools?
That's a very fair point, Greg. Now, I would have liked, but we're running out of time actually, to have really spoken what happened to what was formerly called the USSR, which I think actually came into effect, or at least the Soviet Union came into effect in 1922, after the royal family had been murdered by the Bolsheviks in 1918. But perhaps we'll leave that for another day. But in the last sort of 2 minutes that we've got, can you sort of bring us up to date as to why the USSR crumbled so quickly? And you alluded to it because perhaps of investments from the West and people becoming more enlightened, and whether you think Putin is actually going to lead it to a new area of success, or shall we say luxury, or is he just doing no different to what's happened over previous regimes?
It does look very much to me as if the rulers of Russia from, dare I say, time immemorial, the warlords, be they Timur the Lame, be they Genghis Khan, be they the Tsars, or be they the various rulers of Russia since 22, Stalin, Andropov, Khrushchev, who started his life, of course, driving a tractor as a farmhand, but rose to the top. Most of them got there through brutality, and they seem to have had as their sole objective, once they were there, to hugely enrich themselves, whether that was to build palaces, as the Tsars did, as with those in St. Petersburg, entire rooms built out of commodities like suites of rooms built out of amber, just because they could, they were that wealthy. Or whether it is the subsequent rulers, all of whom have brutalized Russia in one way or another and hugely enriched themselves and their direct family and allies, including Putin.
Well, Greg, that's great. Just for the benefit of our listeners, what's that squeaking going on in the background of your home? Have you got a bird or something there squeaking?
Yeah, we have zebra finches in the house. Mm-hmm. We have golden pheasants and kakariki in the garden, mm-hmm. in aviaries. We also have chickens, because I do like eggs. And living in the countryside, it's all too easy to run out of them. And it's the way you break an egg from a supermarket and watch it go flat in the pan because it's probably 2 or 3 months old and has been in cold storage. I quite like fresh eggs. And we also have ferrets in an attempt to control the inevitable rats of living in a grain area, where every time they harvest, all the rats move into gardens and the like. So, yes, you'll hear noises off on occasions.
Well, I won't ask how you can sleep with all that in the background, but perhaps that's for another day. Greg, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure. And let us hope Russia does not expand, because one of my beliefs is that to be born on this planet in any period in history, one would not wish to have been born Russian.
Indeed not. Thank you, Greg. We hope you enjoyed that discussion, and if so, kindly subscribe to our channel and press the bell sign so that you are notified of our videos as and when they are published. And also in the description box below, we place links to certain books, articles, and programs which you may find of benefit, and for which we will receive a small commission should you purchase through our link. And this will help support our channel and to enable us to develop it further.